Let me first ask you about something you didn't talk about that much, which is the role of public funding. Now, you know, we all know about 25 years ago or so, there was a lot of controversy around NEA funding, and they have slowly built up their reputation back and bipartisan support in Congress. But they've backed away from supporting artists and actually doing more of spaces outside of cultural centers. And I'm just wondering what you think, given the limited amount of public money that there is for the arts, where you would have that money go to. Should the government, do you think, be supporting artists? Do you think they should be putting more money into kind of ownership of spaces or development? Why don't you start, Craig?
Well, I think when the festival started, and we started from nothing, no venues, no films, it was literally in 120 days from scratch. We got the first festival up in May of 2002, announced it in December, went away on Christmas vacation, came back and said, got to put on a festival. We did have early funding, substantial funding. We do have a number of programs from the city and the state, but in terms of percentage of the budget for the festival, we have the Tribeca Film Institute, which is the not-for-profit, and we have a hybrid structure. So the festival itself is a for-profit. So we do not receive at the festival proper public funding, but during the early couple of years, LMDC, Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, did provide some assistance. But I think our view is things at this stage, going into our 10th anniversary, this is self-sustaining. If there's specific programs, that's one of the issues. You fund programs. Capital is always easier than anything connected with operating expenses or programmatic from public sources. So it's a challenge.
Right, Roberta?
Well, I think it's absolutely important to fund artists. I mean, if without artists, you don't have it, you just have a building. And for an organization like the Ford Foundation or National Philanthropy, you know, we do that through service organizations and networks so that there can be jury panels, et cetera. But, you know, thinking about public sector, there's been such a decline of public money, and while on one hand I do feel funding artists is an absolute priority, I also think that the ability for the public sector to work cross-sector is very important, because there is money that is allocated for housing. There is money that's allocated, well, less and less, but for education. There's money that's allocated for transportation, health, and environment. So there are other sectors that we are really relevant to. And when I look at what Rocco Landsman and the NEA are doing right now around certain initiatives like the Our Town initiative, and thinking about working with, you know, various offering planning money for arts districts, but really thoughtful ones, new ways of thinking about that, working with US mayors, I think that's absolutely working in the right direction.
Did you want to jump in on
Sure, just really quickly, ArtSpace has a very strong belief that there has to be a lot of public funding for all arts activities, including for individual artists. In various states, there are programming for state governments, and local governments do give money directly to artists. I know directly the state of Minnesota does give quite an amazing amount of money to individual artists for the work that they're doing. Also, ArtSpace, just organizationally, I've always felt from the very start that I want a big public dialogue and sometimes arguments and disagreements about the amount of public money going into buildings. For example, we in downtown Minneapolis just finished a $43 million campaign for a home for dance in Minnesota that ArtSpace will be owning and operating. And 20 million of that is public dollars. The other 23 million are private dollars. I had to go to the state legislature. I had to convince a lot of people that dance meant something, that the artists themselves came and fought for that. I wanted to echo that I think nationally, Rocco Landesman is doing just a great job of taking on the NEA and convincing, I think, a lot of the United States that art works, and that there's a lot of reason to give back to the artists of our community.
I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, Craig, which I know runs through all of your talks, which is these operating expenses, because clearly there's money out there often for capital expenses, but to really see it through. We know even in New York, which has a very large base for fundraising, that a lot of the artistic institutions, even the biggest ones, could not operate without, you know, fundraising and large portions of it that goes for the Met, you know, the museum or the opera. I mean, how do smaller organizations, arts organizations that perhaps don't have the glamour that Tribeca Film Festival has, or the resources, how do they really see through to get through, you know, we got the space, but now how do we keep it going?
Well, I think there is an opportunity, and I'll speak to Lower Manhattan, and you know, Kelly clearly has created this model over, you know, an extended period of time, that the arts create enormous value for surrounding real estate. And if you look at Lower Manhattan right now, there is a huge opportunity as we transition from what was sort of the financial services industry that will hopefully in some way, shape, or form recover significantly in terms of space usage. But what does that mean to landlords in Lower Manhattan who don't have financing, that they can't roll over their loans, they don't have money for CapEx? And I think there's an opportunity, and that's why we use this cathedral and bazaar model, saying, you know, you can really add enormous value. If the market rent is $40, you can even make a case that it's better to have someone in just paying the operating expenses. And so I think if through some interesting public-private partnerships, whether it be the public sector, the foundation world, the market-driven media businesses, I think that's a real opportunity that if we all kind of band together could make a huge impact on Lower Manhattan. So we're looking at this very, very closely, but it's a recurring problem. But I think more important than just the rent, one of the things that we've learned from some recent studies is that what artists really want is community. And cross-fertilization is really where all the new ideas and innovation comes from. So I think that's really going to be one of the pressing challenges as well as a big opportunity.
Well, I work at a foundation that does fund general operating, and I know many don't. But even though, you know, we are able to do that, I think that the issue of sustainability is critical to all arts organizations. I've been participating in a series of conversations with our peers in grant makers in the arts around capitalization. And this whole issue of right sizing, you know, looking at, is growth always being this growth mode? Is that always the right thing? Is it sustainable at all, especially at this moment in time? So what is the right size of an organization? Where do you know, it's not about stopping the creativity necessarily at all. So, you know, and then when we think about, and our work in many ways is looking at some of these organizations that you're talking about that are really generating up from the ground and don't have the deep pockets or endowments, et cetera. You know, again, the issue of developing resources. Michael Kaiser has been working on, as many of you know, have been in his capacity building workshops. But the fact that many arts organizations that are diverse or smaller only have 10% individual donors or less, whereas major institutions are at 60, 70% or more. And how do you start to begin to develop that type of support from your community? You know, the changing demographics show that, you know, we are changing as a country, and that means wealth is also distributed in different ways, but there are people of many different walks of life who can be connected to arts organizations. And I love this about the Cathedral and Bazaar because, you know, the whole cathedral idea is you kind of go in and you're a supplicant or you're participating in kind of a, you know, kind of prescribed type of activity. But the bazaar is really about that exchange. And you bring something, you offer something. So I think that's where the arts organization situated in a community has a whole different type of relationship.
Did you want to?
Just adding that, it's a little sidebar to that, is that in building spaces for the arts, a warning I say to all my friends and colleagues and always say to myself is, we have to be so careful not to build buildings that we can't operate, and to really look down the line in 5 years, 10 years after operation, will we be able to raise the money given today's environment? So I mean, I think it's a good challenging question to make sure that we can operate it.